I need to tell someone about this, mostly to get it off my chest, but also because, as screwed up as the situation is, it's one of the best stories I've ever heard. I attend a large university in Arizona. I won't say which, but my friends and I were sharing a bottle of Jack the other night, and we started sharing stories. Somehow, we got on the subject of spooky stories, and it appeared that several of us had a strange occurrence to talk about. Gabriel told us about a weird apartment that he and his mother had lived in when they were in West Virginia. Apparently his mother had woken up screaming one night after a dark figure had appeared over her bed. He had come in and found it melting away into nothing, and the two of them had moved out shortly thereafter. John told us about a weird deer he'd seen on a hunting trip, and I told them about a sound I'd heard outside my parents' house in Montana throughout my childhood. One of Dad's friends, he was a zoologist or something, said it didn't sound like any animal he was familiar with. Dad jokingly asked him if it was a Bigfoot or something. He never really quite denied it. He got spooky quiet and just said he wouldn't be caught out dead in the woods, especially not after dark. We never went camping out there anymore, but we certainly never went past the property line either after dark. Passed the bottle to Samuel, and for once, he actually took a sip. Samuel, or Sam for short, had been living in the dorm since before we'd arrived at university. He was in his third year and was studying engineering as he worked towards a bachelor's degree. He had told us several stories about growing up in a small town in Mexico and how his uncle was thanks to his current status as a student. His uncle was a professor of Spanish studies and antiquities, and he had offered to help his nephew get a student visa so he could do more than drink shitty beer in the local bar and do manual labor his whole life. I opened up saying that it was weird to see Samuel drink, but I don't think you understand how strange it was. Samuel was our permanent designated driver because in the 2 years that we'd known him, I had never so much as seen him touch a bottle of alcohol, unless it was to throw it away or take it from us when we had enough. He took a moment to collect his thoughts before saying in a hollow voice, "I told you all I grew up in Mexico, right?" We all nodded, and he continued, "Well, I grew up in this rural little town right outside of Hermosillo. It wasn't large, maybe 8,000 people in the whole town, and most of our work came from the processing plant or from the farms that operated around the small town. My mother and I lived there with my abuelo and my abuela. My uncle was living in America and sending money back when he could. My abuelo was a horse breeder, something my family had practiced for generations, and he would work for the stockman for one of the larger ranches in the area. We weren't quite as well off as the rancher, but we were doing okay. Wasn't a bad life. It was hard, but not without its pleasures. When I was in high school, my friends and I would go to parties held at the local farms. The rancher's son, Santiago, and I had been friends since we were young, and we palled around with some of the ranch hand sons, Juan, Christopher, and Mateo. We were good friends, probably the best friends I've ever had, but one night we found something that none of us quite believed in. We had all grown up with stories about La Llorona or El Cibon, but my mother always loved to use a certain legend to scare me. La Lechuza was a witch who turned herself into some sort of owl demon after her death. She was said to roam the lands, hunting for drunks or just children out after dark. She would make noises in the night to trick you into opening your window so she could steal your eyes. She would pretend to be a baby to lure you into the woods. She would create thunderstorms and other nasty things and would come to get naughty children if they acted out. La Lechuza was used a lot in my house to get me to do things like chores or homework that I really didn't want to do. By the time I was a teenager, though, I was kind of done with my mom's scary stories about owl ladies. I was much more interested in drinking with my friends and meeting girls. I was 16 when she caught me on my way out the door. "I know where you're going off to. I beg you, do not go out there and drink with your friends." I brushed her off, saying I was of age, and if I wanted to go hang out with my friends, then I would. And if La Lechuza would happen across you in your group? I scoffed, telling her that her stories didn't scare me anymore. "That story is what killed your father," she started to say, but I cut her off. Dad had died in a drunk driving accident before I was born. He had driven off the road and hit a tree, his car erupting into a ball of flame, and that's why we had nothing to bury. But Mom had insisted that it had been La Lechuza who had driven him off the road. This had made me even scareder of the creature when I was a kid, but now it made me mad that she would use my father's death like this. I left without another word, climbing into Santiago's car, as it pulled away from my house for the last time. She was standing in the road crying as we drove off. That image will be scarred into my brain until the day I die. We were out late. I couldn't tell you much about the party, just that it was in someone's barn. The beer was hot, the women were lukewarm, and the music was subpar at best. I drank too much, trying to get the fight with my mom out of my head, and by the time we called it a night, I was well and truly drunk. We climbed into Santiago's car, all of us laughing and tipsy. We started out, Santiago managing to keep it on the road as we whooped and hollered in the back seat. He was laughing along with us, turning the music up on the radio, but when he swerved suddenly, we all screamed like banshees. He hauled us back on the road, Mateo opening the window to vomit, and I leaned up as I asked him what was wrong. He looked pale, all the tipsy scared out of him as he stammered, I thought there was an old lady in the road, but when she turned, her body looked wrong. I said how weird it was to see someone so old out this late, but suddenly I yelled for him to look. Something was in the road, and if it was what he had seen before, he had been absolutely right. It was hunched over, a long cloak on its shoulders, and it looked deformed. It turned to look at the car as it barreled forward, and I could see piercing red eyes that bore into my soul. I saw it all in the space of 5 seconds, maybe, but those eyes will stay with me forever. Santiago never had a chance to do anything. He just plowed right into her, doing 55. The car suddenly stopped dead, and I came to about a minute later. I had boffed my head pretty good on the seat, but one look at Santiago told me I had gotten off lucky. He had slammed into the windshield, breaking his neck and turning his skull into a rotten gourd. The others seemed to be okay, but the car was smoking, and we climbed out as we assessed the damage. The whole front end was smashed in like we'd hit a tree or a big rock, but nothing was in the road to be hit. I remembered the old lady and moved off to check the ditches, thinking maybe we had knocked her off the road. The others just milled about, not sure what to do, and that's when it happened. The moon was full that night, or I may very well have missed it. A shadow passed over me, a thing with a wingspan like a condor, and I looked up just in time to see it drop onto my friends as they stood huddled around the car. It had landed on Juan, breaking his back and riding him to the ground. He screamed, watery and miserable. He wouldn't scream for long, though. The bird dropped its head and began to feed on him, its beak plunging and diving as the other two backed away in horror. When it looked up, face dripping blood and owl eyes glaring at me, I ran. I don't know if the other two ran at the time, but I felt like a mouse who'd seen an owl. I ran, still drunk and weaving, and the houses swam up in my peripherals. I could still hear that wet, crunching sound as the creature fed, and I stumbled as my feet hit a root. I kept running, kept moving, kept showing my heels as the houses wobbled like an oil painting all around me. I just kept running, knowing that my house couldn't be far, not noticing the lack of night sounds until it was too late. When that unearthly screech split the night, I panicked and turned a corner at random. When my foot hit a pothole, I thought for sure I was going to die. My world suddenly exploded with light, and I stumbled back on my hands and butt as a bright something nearly blinded me. I turned, putting my back to those blinding lights, and saw a horror as it descended. The headlights spotlighted the owl thing, and as it swooped down on me, I figured this was the end. I closed my eyes and put my hands up across my face, preparing for the end. That's when I heard my mom yelling at the thing. She came out of the car, shouting curses and brandishing a cross on a long silver chain. The owl monster flapped its wings, changing its course and taking off again. It screeched loudly, flapping those wings angrily as it flew away. My mother helped me into the car then, but I must have passed out, because I woke up in my bed the next morning. I would have believed it was a dream if Mom hadn't told me all about it as we sat at the breakfast table. She had made food, and there was a pot of coffee there as well. As I ate, she told me all of it. How the creature had killed my dad one night as he drove home drunk, how Santiago and Juan had been found dead that morning, how my other friends had never arrived home that night. She spelled it out for me and told me how lucky I was to be alive. She said I had been given a chance and that it was up to me to figure out how to use it. She wasn't happy with my answer after I'd thought about it for a few days, but I think she understood. I still went to those parties, but I never drank again. Instead, I helped people get home safely. I never saw that creature again, but there were nights that I imagined I could feel its hateful stare. I was taking its prey from it, stealing its food, and it never quite forgave me for that. Not a day goes by that I don't think about that night and my friends who died. We sat there, drinking as we listened to his story, a cold chill flowing through us as we took it all in. I'd say this was the end, but that wouldn't do him or his story justice. 3 weeks ago, Samuel came to me in tears and told me that his mother was going to die. I sat him down. He was shaking like a leaf, and asked him how he could possibly know that. Before that, I hadn't seen him in class in a few days, and he looked tired and rattled. I dreamed I was in my mother's house, the one she has on my grandparents' property, and I heard her crying. I walked into the living room, and she was sitting at the kitchen table. I walked up behind her, putting a hand on her shoulder, and asked her what was wrong. She grabbed my arm, and her hand had become a claw. Her head turned around, and she screeched at me through that owl beak. Her face had become that of the owl witch, and just before I woke up, she screamed my mother's name. I asked him what that meant, and he said, "Some people say that seeing her in a dream means that someone you love will die. She screamed my mother's name. I can't ignore that." 3 days later, he told me he was returning home for his mother's funeral. They found her in her room. She'd had a heart attack. I need to go home and say goodbye. Will you watch my plants while I'm away? I told him I would, but I think he knew he wasn't coming back. A week ago, I asked his uncle if there was any news. His uncle only sighed and told me that his nephew was missing. My mother tells me that he went to the house he and his mother had shared. No one has seen him since. We don't know where he is, but if you're still watering his plants, I'll pick them up this afternoon. Hopefully, I can give them to him when he comes back. I don't know what became of Sam, but I pray that the owl witch, Lechuza, did not get him. Mel was having a cup of coffee at his favorite little spot one day, when something would take place that he would never forget. He was sitting at the bar area, people watching, as he often did, when an older man and his granddaughter walked in. The two were a study in contrasts. She a young waif so full of life and potential, he a stunted creature whose life was almost used up. His cane was barely audible over the general clamor, but Mel still heard the harsh chock, chock, chock as he walked across the tiled floor. The sight of him made Mel chuckle, though every step seemed to threaten to spill him to the floor. He held the girl's hand in his wrinkled one, and she beamed up at him with genuine love. They were standing in line for a booth, the coffee shop very busy, and as the girl gabbled happily to herself, the old man leaning on his stick, taking it all in as if just happy to be able to still take in anything. Mel felt that his interest was becoming voyeuristic, but he just couldn't look away from the pair. They were so different from the usual people that flitted into the shop, and it appeared that he wasn't alone. 2 women and one of them had noticed the pair as well. Mel spent some time observing them as well, hoping to see the same interest or happiness that he had felt. But what he saw was very different. The girl appeared to be filled with a mixture of trepidation, fear, and resolve that Mel had never seen before. Mel had felt like a voyeur, but the young girl was like a hawk who's seen a rabbit. She didn't look away, seemed unself-conscious of her attention, and had eyes only for the little girl and her grandfather. The other said something to her, grabbed her arm fretfully, but she pulled away as she said something quick and harsh to her. As they waited, the little girl suddenly noticed the pair and told the girl how pretty she looked. The girl's attention was broken suddenly as she looked down at the little girl in surprise. She bent down on a knee, and Mel could see her point to the little girl's shirt and say something that made her giggle. Then she pointed to the old man, her lips asking if this was her grandpa, and the girl giggled as she answered that this was her papa as she clung to the man's hand. He turned to give the girls a slight nod and a smile before turning back to the barista who had arrived to seat them. The two girls watched them go before seeming to decide to come to the bar, where Mel was sitting instead of waiting for a booth as well. As they took their seats beside him, the one who had been watching so intently was still staring at the pair. As the old man smiled happily at the young girl and the doll that she was dancing across the table, the girl's face kept that same look of resolve. She clearly had something to do, something she was loath to do, but had to do, nonetheless. It was clear that it had something to do with the old man and his daughter. "They're quite the pair, aren't they?" Mel asked, making her jump as she blushed shyly, having been caught looking. "You have no idea," she said, her accent strange and exotic. Mel thought she might be from the Middle East, or maybe Northern Europe. The barista came around about that time and took her order. Mel couldn't help but notice the resemblance. The two girls were quite dark, their hair long and black as it spilled down their backs, and as the one with the intense stare leaned in to whisper to the waitress, Mel saw the new girl look over at the pair sitting at the table. She nodded and brought the two girls coffee as she went to bustle in the kitchen. "Do you know them?" Mel asked, becoming very curious as the exchange went on. "Unfortunately, I do," the girl told him, sipping her coffee. The longer he looked at the girl, the more Mel suspected that she was foreign. This was Sweden, of course. There were foreigners everywhere these days. But she also looked foreign in that way that people look out of time. The girl, as he thought of her, was likely in her mid-20s, but her eyes led him to believe that she had lived more in those 20 years than Mel had in his 37. She had lived through terrible times, seen atrocities, and had come out on the other side. He noticed movement from the table where the little girl sat with her father, and she squealed a little as a mountain of whipped cream and sprinkles was delivered atop some chocolate confection. To the father went a far more sensible coffee and a scone, and Mel thought the old man might have made out better. The shop's scones were to die for, and were less likely to put you into diabetic shock. "You probably just made that little girl's day," Mel said offhandedly, guessing the woman had sent the order there. She sighed. "I hope so. I would like to give her some joy on what may be the worst day of her life." Mel looked at her questioningly, but the woman had eyes only for the old man as he sipped before adding sugar to his coffee. "I met him in 2007 when I was 12 years old, and I've spent the last 17 years tracking him down. He has been my sole obsession, my reason for living, and every time I thought I might simply lie down and die, his face pushes me on." She stiffened a little as he looked down at the scone, but his granddaughter did something to steal his attention, and he looked away. "Must be a hell of a story," Mel commented. "Would you like to hear it?" she asked, still not looking away from the old man. "It appears we have some time." Mel wanted to decline, but instead he nodded as he invited her to continue. "It all started when the Russian army invaded our lands." When she started talking, there was no way that he could make her stop. Once she got started, there was no way he would want her to. "When I was little, we lived on a farm far from here. Our town was small, little more than a farming community, but we were happy. My family kept goats, sheep, chickens, cows, and horses. We made a living selling milk and eggs, wool and cheese, and our family was large. I had 9 siblings, 5 boys and 4 girls, and we helped my mother and father with the daily chores and the running of the farm. So when the Russian army pushed a little further, we became afraid. We could see the smoke, we could hear the gunfire sometimes, and the army was nowhere to be seen. The townspeople raised a militia, but it was no match for the might of the Red Army. They shot our young soldiers, our hunters, our ranchers, and marched into the town over the backs of the broken. We could see them from our farm. Father had not joined them, and we knew that the bad times would soon be upon us." She paused, watching as the man took the scone in his hand before setting it down again. She sighed, saying something in a language I didn't know, before continuing. "We were all brought into the town the next day, some of us by force, and taken to the meeting hall in town so we could meet our new overseer. The mayor had stood with the men of the militia and had been killed, so the man who stood on the stage was as different from the mayor as night to day. The mayor was a big bear of a man, and he was kind to his friends and neighbors. This man, slight and wearing a military uniform, looked more like Father Christmas. He was an older man, his face a smiling mask that he showed us with great excitement. His eyes, however, reflected none of the smile on his face. He told us his name was Major Krishker, and that he would treat us as well as we treated him. That turned out to be a lie. For the first few weeks, all proceeded as normal. The soldiers and the overseers toured the town, took in the farms, saw the markets, met the people. The man was courteous, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. The people thought that maybe the occupation would not be so bad. Perhaps he would be a kind overseer, and when he moved on, the town would still be as it had been. They could not have known how short a time that peace would be. It began with simple theft. The soldiers came to our farms and demanded that we give them a portion of our crops. Not much, they said, only an amount that came to around 25% of our total crop. Now, the mayor had always requested a third, so Father was excited that we wanted less. The mayor had already taken his share, however, and Father told the soldiers this. Taking more would cut into the food we had for winter, but the soldiers said he didn't care. "You will give us what we ask for, or it will be taken," they said, and thus we gave it to them. My brothers, none of whom had gone to fight, became angry at this, but Father told them it would be okay. It is not winter yet, and we will grow a little more before it comes. Next came the conscriptions. They told every male over the age of 16 in the village that they would be conscripted into the Red Army. They would be trained, they would be paid, and they would be able to send money back to their families. 3 of my brothers were of this age, and they were taken for training, despite their protests. My father continued to say that this was okay. They would send money back, and our lives might be better. Father had forbidden any of his children to join the militia, but it seemed the war would take them nonetheless. My older brothers left on a truck that day, and we never received money or letters, or saw them ever again. Mel began to worry about the direction of this story. He was expecting a heartwarming tale about someone helping a town in a time of strife. He had hoped that maybe the girl was repaying a kindness to the old man, but the longer the story went on, the less and less he thought it was so. Taking another look at the little girl, who was dancing her doll around the sugary confection, Mel thought she looked different from the old man who sat across from her. Her hair was darker, her features less harsh, but she was young, and he was very old. With so many of the men gone, next came the brutality. The soldiers didn't need to tax anymore. They came and took what they wanted. Our cows, our chickens, our sheep, our goats, our crops. Even a few of my sisters were taken in by the soldiers and came back with bruises and tear-streaked faces. I was young, but I saw the look they gave me as well. My father kept me home, not wanting me to go to the village, but when the food prices rose and our trade began to dwindle, Father found it hard to feed his remaining children. It was only myself, my younger sister Hetz, and my other sister, Gretel, and my older sister, Farah, and, of course, my older brother, Philip. Mother and father tried their best, but when the overseer came to our farm one day, father knew he couldn't hide me any longer. He came to the house, introducing himself as if we didn't already know who he was, and sat at my parents' table to discuss the reason for his visit. He insisted I be there, a girl barely 13, and I remember hating the way he looked at me. He said he had seen me in the market and wanted me to come and stay with him at his villa, saying he would give me a better life and offer me opportunities I wouldn't receive here. Father knew why he wanted me. We all did, but my surprise was real when he agreed. He took the man's hand and promised to send me to him the very next day. "Let us get her ready, and we will bring her to your villa tomorrow," he said to the overseer. And the man was happy. He left, and father got to work. He knew what it would mean if he defied this man, and he had seen the stockades in the square, but he didn't care. They had taken his oldest sons, his livelihood, and he'd be damned if he would let them take his daughter, too. Father loaded me into a grain wagon, and my siblings took me out of town. As we left, I peeked from the back and realized I could be seeing my home for the last time. I found it hard to be quiet as we went, and my crying must have attracted attention. Some of the soldiers stopped us and threatened to search the wagon. Farah was the oldest. Father had tasked her with keeping us safe, and when she offered to go off with the soldiers if they would let us pass, we knew we would never see her again. My brother Philip took the reins, and we left Farah behind. I never saw my parents again. I never saw my brothers again. We kept moving until we came to a town where we had cousins. They helped us and gave us shelter, but I never forgot that man or what he did to our village. We learned later that he took all he could from the land and left it to ruin. He hung my father and my mother and took Farah as his wife. He left us orphans, destitute, and I've never stopped thinking about that man. When I heard that he had fled here to escape justice after being declared a war criminal, I knew our time for revenge had come. Mel had been so focused on the story that he didn't look back at the man until he started gagging. His hands were on his throat, his face puffing as he hacked, and the little girl was now asking if he was okay. There was real fear in her voice, and people were trying to help him. But in the fuss, only Mel saw the other girl, the one who had come in with the storyteller, take the girl by the hand and lead her away. The little girl looked back only a single time, calling for her papa, before the two left. Mel heard the storyteller get up, but before she left, she turned to give him one final detail. "The little girl is my niece, Farah's child by this man who is old enough to be her grandfather. Farah died before he went into hiding, but when we heard that he had fled with a little girl, we knew what we had to do. I remembered one other thing when I was planning this. When he came to the house to ask my father to send me, he told my mother 3 things as she offered him tea and cakes. The first was that he took his coffee black. The second, that he could not abide dairy. And the third was that he had a strong allergy to nuts." She smiled, dipping into a bow as the barista, who had served the two, told her it was time to go. "When you tell the people how I killed one of Russia's monsters, tell them I killed him not with a gun, not with a sword, but with a scone that hid a hand full of walnuts." Ralph walked a lot, like every day a lot. He had lost his car a few years ago during the pandemic. Not because he couldn't pay for it, but because he had a habit of driving drunk, and the cops took his license after the third time, so it didn't make a lot of sense to keep it. He'd walked ever since, and kind of helped him with his sobriety. He was a bit of a mess before that, drinking a lot, showing up to work hungover, eating too much fast food, but the walking had helped him drop a lot of weight and had kind of made him not want to drink. Walking while you were drunk was kind of miserable, and when walking was your means of transportation, you got pretty good at avoiding things that left you unable to do it. Ralph was coming into town on Tuesday, walking up the sidewalk that led from the trailer park he lived in to the grocery store, when he saw the first sign. It was a normal enough white sign with big block letters on the top that read "Missing." The thing that stopped him was the face that looked out from the sign. It was a guy of about 300 pounds, thinning hair pulled back in a ponytail, deep bags under his eyes. He looked like a deeply unhappy man, a man who looked like he was just looking for a hole to die in. And if it had a beer in it, then all the better. The eyes that stared out of that poster looked like the eyes that stared from between the bars of a drunk tank, and they had more than once. Ralph reached out and took the sign, staring into eyes that he hadn't seen in years. He was looking at himself, just a past version of himself, a version 2 or 3 years out of date. Out of date was a good way to describe it, like spoiled milk. Missing, Ralph Gilbert. Address, 9733 Aaron Way, Trailer 17. Last seen, April 23rd, 2023, walking along the shoulder of the road. Call Filibuster Sheriff's Office with any information. Cash reward possible. Cash reward, Ralph thought. It was weird to think that someone would be willing to offer a cash reward for someone like him, but he supposed it was possible. The friends he had now certainly valued him more than that bitch of an ex-wife or either of his ungrateful kids had. More than the family he had left too, for that matter. He put the flyer back up, thinking it was weird that they hadn't just come out to the house to see if he was there. He'd been there for a week after the what, he thought. The night that something had happened. Something Ralph couldn't really remember. He kept walking up the street, enjoying the late afternoon as it dwindled towards dusk. This was his favorite time to walk, he thought. The weather was hot, even for early May, and he spent most days inside due to the heat and the way the sun made his eyes hurt lately. The evening walks were about the best thing for him, and he couldn't wait till autumn came and he could stand to walk during the day again. The last thing he wanted to do was lose his progress. 2021 had been a pretty turbulent year for Ralph, but not all of it had been bad. He had started noticing that the walk was making him lose weight and that he felt better about being more active. It would have been very easy to sit on his couch and feel bad about it. He had certainly done that for a while, but as his food ran out and the money he had gotten from his disability payments started to dwindle, he knew he was going to need to do something. That was how the walking had started. Walk to the grocery store, walk to McDonald's, walk to the 24/7 Phil that he worked nights at, and walk home. After a while, people in the trailer park started to notice that he was walking, and they would offer to pay him so he could walk their dogs. Pretty soon, Ralph had a bunch of mutts on leashes, and he became known as the Dog Man. Soon, people came to walk their dogs with him, and Ralph felt he finally had friends. He hadn't had friends, not since high school, and the ones he had never led him into anything healthy. These guys were walking with him, helping him find the shoes that wouldn't pinch his feet and give him blisters, suggesting pants that wouldn't give him a heat rash. And one day, Ralph hopped on the scales and discovered that he had lost 50 pounds. By 2022, it was 100 pounds, and by the next year, he was down to 180 and feeling better than he ever had. His trips to McDonald's were down to once a week. His dog walking was earning him enough money to keep the bills paid and his fridge filled, and Ralph felt better than he had in years. He had felt like that right up until last week when something had happened. As Ralph came into town, he saw more of the signs hanging on poles and was a little curious as to why no one had come to the trailer park to check on him if they were so worried. He'd been there all week, and they could have come and knocked. Ralph had been kind of out of it the last week, though, and he was worried that he might have caught something. He barely remembered stumbling home after the whatever had happened. Ralph hadn't liked that. It reminded him of being drunk and out of control again. How many times had he stumbled into his trailer after a night of drinking to find that he couldn't remember how he'd gotten there? He sat on his couch, just looking at the dark television, and suddenly he wondered where the groceries had gone. That was when he remembered that he'd been carrying groceries. He'd been coming from the Forest Hills grocer, bags bulging in his hands. He'd come around the corner, Matherson's curve, and then he didn't know. Something had made him squint, and he thought, oh shit, there goes my milk. Then he'd been walking back into his trailer. As he walked into town now, he saw more missing posters, and it started to give him the creeps. Watching his own face, his false face, looking back at him was eerie, and he wanted to rip them down. He was here. He was alive. Why were they looking for him? He wasn't missing. He was walking up the road. He passed people, side-eyeing them as if he expected them to recognize him, but they just walked right on past without a look back. That was weird, Ralph thought. Yeah, he'd been gone for a week, but people surely hadn't forgotten him that quickly. He'd been sitting in his trailer for a week before he'd thought that a walk seemed like a good idea. It was weird. The food should have run out by now, but Ralph hadn't really been hungry. He'd moved between the living room and the bathroom like a sleepwalker, sleeping, sitting up, like he hadn't done since he was still 300 pounds of lazy couch potato. He hadn't felt like he needed to eat anything either, though, and that was rare. Despite his weight loss, he still managed to have a prodigious appetite. He couldn't even remember drinking water that whole week. Until he'd gotten up to go to the walk, he was worried that he was catching the flu. He had wandered around in a daze, just kind of existing, and it made him feel good when the afternoon had finally called to him. As he walked towards the supermarket, however, he suddenly wished he had stayed home. Sitting in the parking lot of the Forest Hills grocer was a green Ford Focus that became the focus of his terror. It shouldn't have been that way. It was just a car, but there was something about it that made him stop and stare. His legs felt made of lead, and his bowels would have turned to water, except he remembered he hadn't done that all week either. That made sense, he supposed. Nothing going in meant nothing coming out. Right? It didn't matter. After a week of no food or water, Ralph should be dead. And that thought seemed to move him at long last. He was suddenly walking towards the car, his eyes falling on a dent in the front bumper. That was a fresh dent, though Ralph didn't know how he knew that. The door to the car was open, and Ralph climbed into the back seat like a sleepwalker. He sat there, waiting for something to happen, feeling kind of silly. This was stupid. The owner of the Focus would come back and ask him what the hell he thought he was doing. He would call the cops. Ralph would go to jail, and then he'd be in big trouble. Well, he said, at least then they would know where he was. Ralph supposed they could take the signs down if he was sitting in jail. Finally, after an indeterminable amount of time, the owner came out with groceries in a brown paper bag. He was a young kid, maybe 20 or 22, and when he opened the back door, he sat them inside without comment. Ralph watched him move around to the front seat, climb in, and crank the car before driving off. The further they went, the more sure Ralph was that the kid could see him. The kid would look in the rearview mirror, see Ralph sitting in the back seat, and freak out. He might have a wreck, and Ralph would feel terrible about that. The longer they rode, though, without the kid commenting on his presence, the stranger it all felt. Ralph leaned towards the kid a little, meaning to tap him, but as he did, he caught a look at the rearview mirror and stopped. The back seat in the mirror was empty, except for the groceries. That's when he remembered, and suddenly, Ralph wasn't in the kid's focus anymore. Suddenly, he was back on the side of the road, near the guardrail from Matheson's curve, and he could see the headlights in his eyes again. The kid was going too fast, hot-rodding around, and his tires had screeched as he hit Ralph. Ralph's groceries had gone everywhere, his milk squishing under the tire and his lettuce rolling under the guardrail. The kid had come out to find Ralph laying across the guardrail, moaning and groaning as he lay dying. The hit had thrown him back, bringing him to rest against the metal rail, and it had broken his back. He had looked at the kid, begging him to help him, and in his panic, the kid had done the only thing he could think to do. He had pushed Ralph over the side of the rail and into the drop below. It was night now, and Ralph was looking over that rail again. He couldn't see his body down there. It had fallen to the bottom and likely been picked clean by scavengers, but he knew it was down there. Ralph would likely go on to be a town legend, someone who had just disappeared one day after making a slight splash and filibuster. But for now, all he could do was look down into the ravine and wonder what to do next. He had read some ghost stories when he was younger, wrote a few of them when he got older, but it wasn't every day that you became one. Something wafted past him on the stray wind, and when Ralph caught it, he realized it was one of the missing posters. An idea occurred to him, and he thought maybe he wouldn't have to stay a mystery. Officer Vermis stood by the guardrail, ready to catch the kid if he decided to make a nosedive. It was pretty high. He might opt for a short flight over a lengthy prison sentence, but Vermis doubted it. The wind pushed his hair just as it did the officer's jacket, and he pointed down almost accusingly as he turned to the kid. "Is this where you pushed the body over?" Vermis asked. The kid, Tyler Machette, nodded before being taken back to the station in the back of a different squad car. Vermis sighed. That was going to be some hard canvassing, but they would find Ralph Gilbert. When they had gone to the kid's house, he had as good as confessed on the spot, and that had made it pretty easy. He was repentant, very sorry, and very young. Some soft-hearted judge would probably not insist on the death penalty for him. It was unlikely he would ever operate a motor vehicle again, not unless the state prison let him run a tractor or something, but he supposed that that would have to be good enough. It was weird, though. The police would have probably never known about the accident if it hadn't been for the tip they had gotten. Looking at Ralph's picture on the front of the poster, Vermis remembered the night he'd taken his license. He'd been a bad drunk, but he'd turned it around, and Vermis hated that he'd ended up like this. It was a bigger shame that the kid had his life ruined by a moment of inattention, but those were the breaks. He flipped it over, looking at the odd writing on the back. It looked like it had been done with mucus, except it was a fluorescent green, like the slime they used to dump on the kids on the show his boys had watched when they were younger. He didn't know what had written it, and he didn't care. They could take Ralph Gilbert out of the unsolved case files and put him in the closed case files, and that was good enough for him. The message read, "Green Ford Focus, dent in front bumper. Kid hit Ralph Gilbert about a week ago on Matheson's curve. Body in the ravine. Don't let me rot down there." I should never have let my sister talk me into working for Merry Maids. I was laid off midway through the year and found myself unable to pay for things like food and rent. My sister, my roommate of 2 years, told me I should apply at Mary Maids until something better came along. She'd been working on and off with them for years, her grants and housing allowance from college paying off most of her bills, and told me that a little hard work wouldn't kill me. So far, she was right. Diana, the lady at the company, took my info and got me signed up. After a short training course and orientation, I was an official Mary Maid. What they never tell you in training, however, is that new maids are widely mistrusted by the clients. You have no resume and no one to vouch that you aren't a thief or a murderer, so most clients will refuse a new maid in favor of a vetted one. 2 weeks on the job, I didn't have a single client or a cent to my name. With my savings running low, I begged the service for someone, anyone, so I could make money enough to afford ramen noodles. The next day, she sent me a text that Miss Margaret Maisel had agreed to let me be her new maid. I cursed my luck, but I could hardly refuse. Margaret Maisel lived in the same apartment complex I did. Margaret, or Mad Maggie as we call her here, was a senile old lady who wandered around the neighborhood and talked to herself. She lived on the 5th floor and was widely avoided by most of the other tenants. She had only gotten crazier after her son had left a few years ago. She could usually be found in the cafe downstairs during the day as she babbled to herself and made life hell for the staff. The thought of going into her apartment made my skin crawl. But I needed the money, and if I turned her down, I'd probably get fired. I took my bucket from the closet and made my way up to the 5th floor. Maggie answered the door on the 3rd knock. She opened it a crack, one of her bulbous toad eyes peeking out at me. She took in my skirt with the company logo on it and my work bucket that also bore the company logo, but I could see her mistrust. Surely she had gotten a similar message, hadn't she? "Good afternoon, Miss Maisel. I'm here from Mary Maids, and I've come to clean your apartment." She looked at me through the crack in the door for another 30 seconds, the silence getting pretty uncomfortable, before closing it again so she could remove the chain that had been keeping it cracked. When I tell you that Maggie looks like a toad, you'll probably think I'm being rude. I'm really not. Maggie looks like a toad. She's about 5'2" and nearly as wide as she is tall. They say she has money. I know she never works, but she always looks so dumpy. She wears the same filthy red dress with a stuffed neck, scuffed black shoes, and a pair of gold glasses that make her 2 large eyes look even bigger. Her muddy red hair is always piled on top of her head in a sloppy bun, secured with a large hairpin. She came up to mid-chest on me, and we stood in the foyer looking at each other. "You live on the 2nd floor, she croaked, sounding like a pack-a-day smoker. It wasn't a question. She clearly wasn't as crazy as we all thought. "I do," I answered, not sure what to say. "Well, let me show you what you'll be doing," she said, shuffling into the apartment. I had honestly expected a filthy hovel, given the state of her clothes, but it was actually pretty clean. The kitchen had a sink with dishes in it, but it looked cleaner than mine most days. Maggie informed me that the dishes and the countertop would be part of my daily cleaning, as well as sweeping and mopping. We passed through the living room, but she made her way up to the hall bathroom instead. The bathroom was a bit messy, but having grown up with siblings, it was nothing I couldn't handle. Maggie told me I'd be responsible for the sink, the shower, the toilet, and the floors. As we left the bathroom, I thought we'd be heading into the 2 bedrooms in the back of the house, but Maggie started walking towards the living room instead. "Aren't we going to see the bedrooms?" I asked. Maggie stopped in the hallway, staring forward without looking at me. "No," she said after some deliberation, and I saw her slide the necklace out of her shirt as she started to stroke it. "They're included in the monthly bill. I don't mind cleaning them if you want them." "No," she said again. "You mustn't go in there. Jeffrey wouldn't like it." She said it almost too low for me to hear, but I still caught it. Jeffrey had been her son. He'd grown up in this complex, but been gone before my sister and I had moved in. People said he'd been a smart kid on his way to college, and his mother hadn't quite been ready to cut the apron strings yet. They had fought a lot, many screaming matches ending with a visit from the police, until one day, he just disappeared. Not long afterwards, people saw her talking to that necklace, usually calling it Jeffrey when she did. She'd been odd before, but people figured she had finally lost it after that. We came into the living room then, Maggie still stroking her necklace. The living room was gray, with a dark gray couch, light gray carpet, off-white walls that gave the appearance of storm clouds, and an armchair that looked like a rain cloud about to burst. There was an old TV set, one of those 50-pound ones with the dials, a pair of bookcases stuffed full of old paperbacks, and a haggard-looking Christmas tree covered in colorful balls of spun glass. Maggie told me that I was to vacuum in here, wipe down the TV with Pledge from under the sink, and dust the bookcase and the TV. And the tree, I asked? She looked startled by the question and glanced at the tree nervously. No, I'll dust that myself. You just leave it be. And with that, I set about my tasks. For the first half hour, Maggie hovered close by, pretending to do things, but ultimately just keeping an eye on me. She pretended to bake in the kitchen as I cleaned the dishes and wiped the counter. She pretended to do laundry in the hall as I cleaned the bathtub and scrubbed the toilet. Then, as if she thought I was stupid, she pretended to read on the couch as I polished the TV and vacuumed the living room. I say she pretended because it was pretty obvious that she was watching me, while her hands made busy motions with whatever she was supposed to be doing at the time. That was the first look I got at the Christmas tree. Like an off-season Walmart special, it was an ancient plastic thing, hung with tinsel and lights that blinked dumbly from the green guts of the thing. It was hung with dazzling balls of glass, sparkling as the lights winked off of them, and I felt captivated by them as I worked. They swirled with their own strange patterns, with their own peculiar energy, and I felt almost drawn to them. I wanted a closer look, but that old bat had her froggy eyes on me, and I couldn't risk getting fired on my first day. I finished up in about an hour and put my things back in the bucket before saying I'd see her tomorrow. That was my first encounter with Mad Maggie and her strange house. My sister commiserated with me when she got home. Oh God, she's the worst. That old bag always followed me around when I cleaned her house, pretending to do stuff. She wouldn't even let me in the living room, kept her eyes on that damn Christmas tree the whole time. You know she keeps it up year-round. Won't let anyone near her to that weird glass menagerie of hers. Yeah, I said leadingly. Did you get a look at what was in those balls? My sister shook her head. It looked like looping spirals, but the closest I ever got was when she had me haul that grungy TV up that she found on the street. I bet she still has it in her living room. I told her that she did, telling her how Mad Maggie had made me polish that tatty old thing, and we set about and made fun of the crazy old witch for the rest of the night. Even so, I found myself wondering about those balls. Why were they so important to her? When I'd offered to dust them, she had acted like I'd threatened to smash them. Why were those ornaments so valuable? I found myself thinking about them the next morning as I got ready to go back up there again. The next time I went to her apartment, she met me at the door and hovered as I cleaned again. She had left me a few dishes in the sink, some coffee stains on the countertop, and she cleaned leftovers out of the fridge as I worked before handing me a bag and telling me to take it out. I moved on to the bathroom, changing the garbage and wiping up the sink, and I found that she had stepped into the back room when I finished the bathroom. I made my way quickly to the living room and started vacuuming close to the tree. The tree blinked sadly, the balls sparkling invitingly as I vacuumed closer and closer. They were definitely blown glass, fragile and elegant as they hung in space. I could see intricate patterns inside each of them. I bent close, looking at one of the patterns, and could swear that I saw something moving. Each of the spheres had a different design in the middle, and the way the light played across them, the patterns almost seemed to shift and... Careful! Her yell cut across the vacuum noise and I almost bumped the tree stand. She ran towards me, her eyes on the balls, and she shot me a murderous look. I wasn't sure why. I hadn't done anything but vacuum, as far as she knew. Sorry, ma'am. Didn't mean to get too close. I was just vacuuming, like you said. She didn't seem to buy it. She sat on the couch, TV on, as I finished my tasks. Her eyes never left me, though, and I got the distinct impression that I might not be invited back again. When I left, I heard her many locks snap shut behind me, and she started talking to that weird necklace again as she returned to the couch. I didn't know if I would be invited back, but I knew I needed to have another look at those glass balls. I slept poorly that night, my dreams full of those strange little ornaments. In my dreams, each of them contained a solar system. As I stared at them, I felt myself sinking into them like a towering god, but even as I fell towards them, there was a shadow that loomed over me. I turned to look back just before I woke up and saw Maggie's crazed face staring at me like the eye through a microscope. The next day, I was given 5 new clients and told not to go back to Maggie's apartment. We have a new girl starting, and we always start them off at Maggie's to see if they'll last. The lady seemed to realize what she had said and laughed on the other end of the phone. Sorry, I know it's unfair to test people, but you passed, so congratulations. I sat out that day with a full schedule and a troubled mind. I had hoped for at least one more day to look at Maggie's Menagerie, but it appeared that it wasn't going to be. As I was leaving, I passed a girl in a similar uniform coming in through the lobby. She was young, maybe 19, and her dark curls bobbed as she bustled along with her bucket and her handbag. She saw me and smiled, stopping to ask me about Maggie since it was her first day. I had some time before my first client and treated her to a coffee in the cafe. It was likely to be the nicest gesture she was going to get today. We chatted as we sipped our subpar, over-doctored coffee, and I learned that her name was Jeanette, and she had just started business school. I'm hoping to get my business degree in 2 years as opposed to 3, so I can start working at my mom's fabric store. She's branching out in a few years, and she's offered me my own location if I can prove to her that I can handle myself. We made small talk, but inevitably the conversation came back to Maggie. What's she like, anyway? I heard she's a little odd, but she's ultimately harmless, right? I considered telling her about the tree and to warn her to stay away from it, but I decided that she would learn soon enough. Yeah, she's a little odd, but I don't think she's malicious. Just understand that she has some strange ways about her and that she takes her rules very seriously. I hear she's got a bit of a reputation, the girl said, lowering her voice. Girls tend to quit when they work for her. Some of them even go missing or just disappear altogether. I shrugged. It's a busy city. People tend to just leave when the cost of living gets too high. Jeanette nodded. This was known, but she made a sound as she sipped her tea that told me that wasn't all. A girl in my class said she'd had a roommate who worked for Mary Maid and got placed with Maggie. The girl didn't seem too worried about Maggie, but then she didn't come home one evening and never showed back up for her things. Her parents came to get them eventually and told her that there was a police report and that everyone was searching for her since they hadn't heard from her in days. I started to ask her if the roommate had mentioned the Christmas tree or the menagerie of small ornaments, but decided against it. After a few more minutes of polite chatter, I excused myself and wished her good luck on her first day. She thanked me and bounced off towards the elevators like she was going to meet her Prince Charming or something. Unfortunately for her, it looked like she was about to meet a witch instead. I spent the next few weeks cleaning rich people's condos or servicing dingy apartments with harried-looking mothers or frazzled-looking single fathers. As I worked, I gained more clients. By the end of the month, I had 15 regular customers that I saw at least once a week. I really had too much to deal with to think about Maggie or her glass baubles, but they were never far from my dreams, it seemed. I had the dream about the glass universe almost every night. Now, however, just before I woke up, the looming Maggie would croak out about how I didn't belong here, and I would wake up in a cold sweat with my heart racing. It had been almost 2 months since I'd been in her apartment, before I even thought about her in my waking hours. I was leaving one of my regulars to go do a special job, a job with better than average pay, when my phone rang. I picked it up and heard my sister on the other end, telling me that she'd be a little late tonight. But it's our movie night, I whined with fake outrage. I'll be there. I just have to stop off for one last job on the way home. Some of us didn't get invited to clean the judge's condo with the other bootlickers. I scoffed. Hey, when you're the best, you don't have to kiss ass. So what's the job you have to do anyway? Oh, I gotta clean Mad Maggie's apartment before the end of the day. Apparently, Georgette hasn't been coming to work the last couple of days, and the old toad is livid. That made me pause. What happened to her? Who knows? I guess she couldn't hack it, so she went back to wherever it was she was from. I'll see you later, sis. My train just stopped, and I'm late for my next client. I said bye and hung up, but her words stuck with me as I met the other girls at the lavish condo. We were supposed to be cleaning it top to bottom before the judge and his family arrived at 8 o'clock, but my mind was preoccupied with thoughts of the bubbly Jeanette just up and missing. She had seemed so excited about starting her new school and her new job, and I couldn't see her getting burned out in less than a month. Had something happened to her? Was it the same thing that had happened to the other girls that had disappeared when they started working for Maggie? Hey, get the lead out, or you can just leave and not get paid. You're in the way, one of the girls shouted at me. I realized I'd been dithering around with the same task for a while and tried to put the idea out of my head. I had to work. I wanted the money, and by 7 o'clock, we'd be done. So I worked double time after being called out, and even the girl who had shouted at me had to agree that my reputation was well earned. We divided up the cash between the 5 of us, and they invited me to come out for drinks with them. I declined, saying that my roommate was waiting for me to start movie night, so we all said our goodbyes and I left to get a bus for downtown. I arrived home to an empty apartment. My sister still wasn't back, and I wondered if she would be okay in Maggie's apartment. My sister was tough, though, and she'd been there before, hadn't she? I flopped onto the couch, kicking my shoes off and scrolling through Netflix as I tried to find something to watch until she got there. She'd be back any minute, and we'd order a pizza and watch movies and talk about the crappy day we'd both had. When my phone rang at 9 o'clock, I realized I'd fallen asleep, and my sister hadn't woken me up when she got in. The call was from Dianne at Mary Maid's. "Hey, could you do a little favor before you start today? I guess no one went over to clean Maisel's apartment last night. I know it's in your building, so could you stop by and clean it, please?" I struggled up off the couch, walking into my sister's room as I processed all this. I thought my sister was stopping by last night," I said, pushing her door open and finding her room empty and her bed unslept in. "I thought so too, but the old lady is saying no one's cleaned her apartment, and she's mad as hell about it. Can I count on you to clean it?" I stood in the doorway to my sister's room, not really feeling like I had much of a choice. "Yeah, I'll go." "Terrific," Dianne said. "I appreciate it." I started calling my sister on the way up. Her phone rang and rang before finally going to voicemail. I heard her nasal voice tell me to "leave a message, bitch," before the tone. I called her 3 more times, all of them going to voicemail, before I reached Maggie's floor and the elevator opened with a ding. I was in poor spirits when I knocked, but was greeted by a very different Maggie. Maggie was all smiles. Her energy was high, and her warmth almost changed her before my very eyes. She apologized for being rude on the phone with the lady from the agency, but she needed someone out here right away to clean. That poor Jeanette girl had just up and disappeared one night, and when no one had come last night either, she had just been so mad. She regretted it now, and she hoped that nothing had happened to Jeanette. This was a very different Maggie than I was used to seeing, and her new energy was almost as jarring as her old deranged self. I started cleaning in the kitchen, Maggie making herself a cup of coffee, as I tidied up the small mess in the sink and on the stove. The kitchen looked as clean and unused as it always did, and I was almost afraid to see the rest of the house if she'd freaked out over a mess. When I finished the kitchen, the old toad told me that she was going to the bathroom, and that she'd just tidy it up after she was done. "Here, why don't you have something warm before you start in the living room?" she said, offering me a cup of coffee that she'd been making. I took the cup hesitantly, but the coffee smelled rich and decadent as the steam hit my nostrils. She sipped at her own cup, looking at me expectantly, and it felt rude to at least not taste it as she went on smiling at me in that toadish way of hers. She excused herself as I took another long drink and went to the bathroom to freshen up. I set the cup down after she'd left, the coffee tasting wonderful, but not liking the way she watched me while I drank it. I wanted to clean the living room quickly so I could get out there and start looking for my sister. The living room was as spotless as always, but I fired up the vacuum and tried not to let my eyes linger on the Christmas tree that had haunted my dreams. As I slid the plastic head back and forth over the carpet, though, I found my eyes tracking back to the ornaments again and again. I kept catching movement out of the corner of my eye as I vacuumed, and I thought for sure that it was coming from one of those little balls. I told myself it was just the lights blinking behind them, but the longer it went on, the more certain I was it was something from inside the baubles. I started vacuuming closer to the tree, and as I did, I found that one of the little glass ornaments was indeed moving. It was shaking, ever so slightly, rocking from the vibrations of the vacuum, I had no doubt. As I got closer, I could tell it wasn't the vacuum making it move, though. The little pattern inside was undulating weirdly, and I finally took a knee next to the ball as I tried to get a better look. I could still hear the old toad puttering around in the bathroom, and if she caught me snooping at her precious menagerie, I guess she'd just kick me out, and I'd never be able to come back again. I know now that there were worse things than being kicked out of her apartment. Hanging there was a new glass ball, a deep red one that was jouncing like someone was moving it. I stared hard at the little pattern, and when my eyes finally focused on it, I sat back hard on my rump and sucked in my breath. Inside the ball was a person, a girl only a few years older than me, with dark hair, a plaid skirt, and a shirt with the same name and number on it that mine had. I recognized her. Why wouldn't I? Hadn't I seen her every day for my entire life? Hadn't I waited for her to come home last night? "You shouldn't have gotten so nosy, dearie," said a froggy voice from right behind me. I turned to see Maggie, standing a couch's distance away, her eyes smiling cruelly as her mouth stretched sweetly. I tried to stand, but my legs were feeling a little wobbly. My head shimmered as I tried to get up, and I wondered what the hell was wrong with me. I hadn't been crouched long enough for my legs to have fallen asleep, and I certainly hadn't stood up, so my head shouldn't be spinning. The hunched creature was rolling like a wave in front of me, and I tried to sweep my arms at her as she got close. She walked in slow, not needing to hurry. She had me right where she wanted me. "Not feeling well, dearie? That's okay. Let old Maggie make you feel all better." She reached for me, and I knew I had to do something if I didn't want to end up like my sister. I summoned up the last of my strength and bolted for the door, knocking her over in surprise as I did. My legs were rubbery, and I almost tripped into her coffee table, but I managed to make it to the door before she could get up and come after me. The door had 5 locks and a chain, and it seemed that my fumbling hands were taking way too long to open them. When the chain caught, I roared in frustration and closed the door again, shooting it blindly across the runner as I ran for the elevator, the door hanging open behind me. The little number had lit to 5 when I heard the old crone caw behind me. She was in the doorway, clutching her chest and staggering after me, her face as red as a strawberry. I jammed the button in desperation, the old woman taking a staggering step into the hallway as she cawed wordlessly after me. I heard her fall, heard her head smack the ground 20 feet away, but as the doors opened, I bolted inside and pushed the emergency closed button. My last image of her was her prone form lying on the ground as the doors closed ominously. I called the police from the lobby, the manager having to dial the phone since I was way too unsteady once I got there. I slurred out something about being drugged and nearly attacked by the woman in 502, and the police told me to stay in the manager's office until they arrived. I handed him back the phone and heard him talking to the police in a distant, vague way. Whatever she had slipped me was making me loopy, and when I passed out a few minutes later, I wasn't aware of much until a paramedic shone a light in my eyes. The police were there as well, and they had some questions. They had found Maggie in the hallway outside her apartment, dead of a heart attack. The whole apartment had been roped off as a crime scene then, and they suspected that I had caused her heart attack in some way. I denied this fervently, saying that she had drugged me and tried to attack me, and when the toxicology came back, the police seemed a little more likely to listen. The collection of Mary Maid tubs they found stashed in the bedroom went a long way to proving foul play, and I heard they found something in the closet that prompted them to call the FBI. Apparently one of the bedrooms had contained the personal effects of some of the girls, and had prompted a background check into the relatively unknown old woman. They had found some interesting things about her, things that had somehow not followed her from Russia, where her name was Mazzeline. She had been implicated in a number of disappearances, all young girls between 10 and 20, and all having disappeared after being hired to clean her house. She had fled with her then infant son, and Interpol had lost track of her. It seemed now that the search was over, though. I was allowed to go back home, but I'm concerned about my sister and the others that may be stuck in those glass balls. The officers didn't believe me when I told them about the Christmas tree. They probably thought I was still loopy from the drugs, but I know what I saw. Maggie's been doing this for years. I'm sure of it, and tonight I'm going back in to save them. Even if I have to bring the Menagerie back to my apartment, I intend to find a way to free my sister from whatever that witch has done to her. The job wasn't fancy, but it would pay the bills, and that was what I needed right then. I'd graduated high school a few years ago, and no sooner had I thought about entering the job market than COVID hit and shut a lot of the world down. Suddenly, most of the things I would be qualified to do would make me a non-essential worker, so I decided to make my mom happy by going to college. She wanted me to take the time and get a degree or a certificate or something, but after 2 years and 2 changes of major, I had very little to show for my efforts. My counselor, after scowling at my file for a few minutes, finally sighed and said something to me that I'll never forget. Some people do well in school. To some people, this is a chance to engage with peers and better themselves, but this isn't the case for everyone. I feel like you may be trying too hard to be something that someone else wants you to be. Why not go out and live a little? come back when you decide what you might like to be. Mom didn't much care for that answer, and she said if I was planning to drop out of school, then I would need to help with the bills. Dad was retired, and Mom was getting ready to retire. The last thing they wanted was another useless mouth to feed. So, started looking for a job, but the list of potential positions wasn't very long. I didn't want to flip burgers or wash cars or something I'd have to fight high school kids for, but I didn't have the skills for anything like maintenance work or coding. I didn't have the job experience for anything that wasn't entry level, and when they asked if I'd be willing to work nights, I said I would. When the site I was using sent me a list of potential jobs, I grimaced at the 6 names. Not a lot of options, but I suppose there had to be something there. There were 2 fast food jobs, so they went out. There was a part-time janitor position, but I was looking for something full-time. That left a job with a cab company, a bagger at Publix, and an assembly line job for Braxton Moore. That one surprised me because you didn't often see entry-level positions open there. Braxton Moore was an air conditioner company, one of the biggest ones in the region, and it was a place where people usually stayed for quite some time. I was in for a further surprise when I read the hours. Shift is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Candidates will need to be able to stand for 3+ hours